When people talk about the most tragic character in anime and manga, one name usually comes up without hesitation: Guts, the tortured warrior from Berserk. His entire life has been one long chain of suffering, betrayal, and struggle. Born from the corpse of his dead mother and forced to fight for survival as a child, Guts never got to experience safety or kindness the way others did. Every time he found even a glimpse of peace, the story would rip it away from him. Fans love him for his resilience, for his raw humanity, and for his ability to keep walking even when the world tries to crush him. To most, he's the definition of a tragic hero, someone who suffers endlessly but refuses to give up. But what if that view is only half the truth? What if the real tragedy of Berserk isn't carried by Guts alone? There's another character whose pain is just as deep, maybe even more haunting: Casca. She's often remembered as Guts' partner and one of the strongest female warriors in the Band of the Hawk. Yet her story, her trauma, and her silence often fade into the background whenever fans talk about Guts' torment. The truth is, Casca's suffering isn't secondary. It's equal, and in some ways, even crueler. It's time to recognize that Berserk's most tragic hero might not just be Guts. It's both of them together. From the very beginning, Guts' life is defined by pain. He's not born into love or safety, but straight into blood and death. Raised by mercenaries who treat him more like a tool than a child, he grows up knowing nothing but violence. Every small bond he forms, every sliver of happiness, ends in betrayal. When he joins Griffith's Band of the Hawk, he finally finds purpose and a kind of family. But even that fleeting comfort is temporary. The infamous eclipse destroys everything. Griffith sacrifices his comrades to become a member of the God Hand, and Guts loses nearly everyone he loves. In one night, he loses his friends, his arm, and the trust he had in the world. It's no wonder that moment defines him. It's the point where he becomes the struggler, the man who fights back against fate itself. But while the story gives Guts room to express his rage, grief, and desire for revenge, Casca's pain during the same event is often treated like an afterthought. Guts' trauma is loud. It screams, bleeds, and fights back. Casca's trauma is quiet. It steals her mind and her identity, leaving her voiceless. Yet both come from the same night, the same horror. Before the eclipse, Casca was more than just a soldier. She was Griffith's most trusted commander, a fierce leader, and someone who finally began to discover her own agency and love through her connection with Guts. But when the world collapses during the eclipse, she doesn't just lose people. She loses herself. Her assault at Griffith's hands is one of the most horrifying moments in manga history, not just because of the physical act, but because of what it does to her spirit. It strips her of her confidence, her control, and her ability to live as the person she was. After the eclipse, Casca's mind breaks. She becomes trapped in a childlike state, unable to communicate or even recognize her own trauma. What makes her tragedy worse is how it's often used as fuel for Guts' story. His anger and guilt over what happened to her drive his journey forward, but Casca herself is left behind in silence. Fans talk endlessly about Guts' revenge, his rage, his struggle. But Casca's suffering rarely gets the same focus. It's as if her pain exists only to deepen his. This imbalance reveals something uncomfortable about how tragedy is often portrayed in fiction. Guts' suffering is given weight because it's active. He fights against it. Casca's suffering is passive, internal, and ongoing. The world took away her ability to even express her pain, and that makes her tragedy less visible, but not less powerful. Her silence doesn't mean her pain is smaller. It means she's been robbed of a voice to tell her story. Casca's trauma isn't just another brutal scene meant to shock readers. It's the complete erasure of a woman who once stood tall beside men in battle. She had everything: skill, leadership, respect, and love, and all of it was stripped away in one horrifying moment. The emotional weight of that loss is staggering. When we watch Guts rage against destiny, we should also think about what it means for Casca to simply exist after that night. Her survival, in its own quiet way, is an act of strength just as powerful as Guts' sword. What makes their stories so heartbreaking is how they mirror each other. Guts fights the world that destroyed him. Casca endures it in silence. Guts channels his pain into anger. Casca carries hers like a locked wound. He screams at the heavens. She retreats into herself. Both are trying to survive the same nightmare, just in completely different ways. And Berserk wouldn't be the same without both sides of that suffering. The tragedy of Guts and Casca is shared. It's not a competition. Too often, fans compare whose pain is worse, as if trauma can be measured. But Berserk teaches that pain takes many shapes. Guts is broken because fate never lets him rest. Casca is broken because fate took away her ability to choose anything at all. Both are crushed by the same world that treats human lives as disposable. Both are victims of destiny's cruelty. If Guts represents defiance, the roaring fire that refuses to die, then Casca represents what happens after the fire burns out. She's the ashes, the silence, the unhealed scar. Her suffering might not lead to epic battles or grand speeches, but it's just as meaningful. In many ways, she represents the cost of Guts' survival, the price of living in a world where victory and loss are inseparable. And yet, the bond between Guts and Casca remains one of Berserk's most powerful elements. They are not just lovers or comrades, they are reflections of each other. Both were used by Griffith's dream. Both were broken by the same night. Both are trying, in their own ways, to hold on to what's left of their humanity. When fans call Guts the most tragic hero, they miss that Casca is part of that same tragedy. She's not just someone he needs to protect. She is his equal in suffering and strength. What makes Berserk so powerful is that it doesn't let its characters escape the consequences of their pain. It doesn't give easy closure or clean redemption. It shows that some wounds never truly heal. Guts keeps moving forward, dragging his pain with him. Casca's recovery, slow and fragile, shows how survival doesn't always mean healing. Both of them live with the ghosts of the eclipse every day. That shared endurance, that shared pain, is what truly defines Berserk. When you think about it, calling Guts the most tragic hero alone almost feels unfair. It suggests his pain is somehow greater, when in truth, Berserk's tragedy is built on both of them. Guts is the outward expression of rage against destiny. Casca is the quiet aftermath, the reality of what happens when destiny wins. Without her, his journey wouldn't mean as much. Without him, her pain wouldn't have the faint glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, she can heal someday. Berserk is often remembered for its monsters, violence, and brutal world. But the real horror isn't the demons. It's the way life keeps taking from people who have already lost everything. The true darkness of the story is watching two people who should have saved each other forced to suffer in different ways, side by side. Guts' story teaches us about the strength to keep fighting. Casca's story teaches us about the pain of being forgotten. Together, they form the real heart of Berserk. Their tragedy isn't about who suffered more, but about how two souls, crushed by the same destiny, find meaning in survival itself. If Guts is Anime's most tragic hero, then Casca stands right beside him, not in his shadow, but as his equal. Their stories are inseparable, their pain intertwined, and their survival a shared defiance against the darkness. In the end, Berserk's greatest tragedy isn't one man's suffering. It's the fact that two people who loved each other were broken by the same world and never given the chance to heal together. Every time Guts screams in fury, every time Casca sits in silence, they tell the same story, that sometimes surviving is the hardest thing a human being can do. So maybe Anime's most tragic hero isn't who we think it is. Maybe it's not about choosing between Guts or Casca. Maybe the real tragedy is that both of them had to endure a pain that no one should ever face. And they did it together, in love, in loss, and in the eternal shadow of destiny.